everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's session. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. My name is Steve Ward. I will be your host for today's proceedings. A couple of housekeeping things for us. Phones are on mute. We do that to prevent any of the background noise issues. But we want to hear from you. So if you have questions or comments, things you want to get flagged, please let us know through the Q&A window or the chat window, and we'll address those. We're recording today's session. We'll make it available for you probably within about 24 hours once it gets compiled by my colleague Scott. My colleague Scott is here. He sits in the background doing interesting and neat things as we go along, shooting links across, things of that nature. So, throughout the session, we'll share useful content with you. Feel free to click and download. And he's already probably doing that right now, so that's great. We'll get started. So we're talking today about eSkimming security, specifically around what we're seeing in terms of increased scrutiny from the card brands. Sort of a push to get the compliance adherence with requirements under PCI DSS taken care of. Some very interesting things that I'll share with you in terms of advancing threats that should hopefully be, compelling enough to keep you moving on the right track to solve the problem. And then we will frame out some things that we are hearing through our connections to the QSA community. This is the assessors that audit for PCI compliance at the level one end of the merchant community. Some things that they're looking for, things that you should be thinking about in terms of ways that you need to sort of wire and operate your program to ensure seamless audit, and to make sure that, more importantly, you've really got the firmest grasp on the issue from a security perspective. So let me just do a little bit of intro in terms of who Source Defense is, in case you don't know us. We have been the pioneer in this space. We are the market leader in eSkimming security, really the pioneer that saw this problem about a decade ago. We may have seen, most recently, we're selected effectively as MasterCard's global partner in the eSkimming security world. Very proud of that. We look at our world and our universe and our mission as one of protecting data at the point of capture. Really rounding out web security, helping to enable the integration of all these new features and capabilities and functions that you want on your website, to serve to consumers. Really, we think that we're in the third-party risk management business, and that we've got a sure case to make around your zero trust strategies and supporting those. And I'll get into a little bit of that as we go along. Excuse me. Protecting data at the point of capture, really in our mind, is about addressing security and data privacy. And obviously, as it's framed in this conversation, compliance with PCI DSS. You probably think of this problem and know it most around the eSkimming issues, but there are sort of other things that you need to understand in terms of the need to control, manage, and monitor your digital supply chain, and we help with all of that. We are a PCI certified company. We obviously help with PCI compliance. There's some direct connections to GDPR, to HIPAA, to FIC, other forms of security mandates and compliance mandates that you need to adhere to. We help with those as well. We are a PCI PPO, which is a principal participating organization, meaning that we are engaged with the PCI Council. And are there and active in providing feedback in terms of how the standard is shaped. We're an active part of this community. We're part of the PCI Board of Advisors. I actually sit on the PCI Board of Advisors as our representative from Source Defense. So we know the world. We've got a lot of background and a lot of history in it. We've got 1,000 plus of the world's largest brands that have trusted us and call us their partner. We support everything from the card brands through to merchant acquirers, to the PSP community, the e-com platform community. Obviously, merchants, yourselves, those that are merchants on the call, and QSAs that are on the call as well. We work with, a vast network of people inside the PCI community. And so we come to the world, fairly well informed about the problem and, best ways to shape your approach to solving it. The problem itself, this is sort of a little bit of a 101, but I want to make sure that I never assume and everyone on the call has, a really solid understanding of what's going on. the problem itself really is an issue of lack of control over the partners that power your website. And it's I think in a lot of cases coming to the realization that your website really isn't. And what I mean by that is that, unlike other, applications that you may have developed and may run for your business, your website really is a hodgepodge of code, with roughly 82% of it coming from third-party partners. This code is currently outside of your control, and the actions taken by it, whether they be in a benign fashion or in a malicious fashion, if compromised by an adversary, are currently overlooked. You don't have native controls in place. To manage the JavaScript that is being served up, millions of times a day, week, month, year, however big you are, potentially billions of times, to a consumer. There's all sorts of technology that's embedded in your website, like analytics tools and chatbots and social media and tracking pixels and video players and ad tech and all these things that you didn't write the code behind, but you effectively are giving trust to and are serving up to your consumer in every single interaction, and whether that be you are in the transportation and the travel industry or hospitality, or you sell goods, or even you're a financial services company, you've got all this code that's running that can listen to and sniff and can scrape data as it's being entered, as it's being captured in the forms that power your online interaction, with your customers. And when it is compromised, it can do some really bad stuff. It can change page content, can deface your site, can add functionality and add imagery and content and text and form fields that aren't intended to be there. It can record keystrokes. It can redirect visitors to URLs or domains underneath their attacker control. We see that all the time. It can capture, obviously, and exfiltrate data. In the case of the PCI concern and the eSkimming concern, that's card data. But more broadly, it can be any form of data that's PII oriented that an adversary, could find a path to either monetize or to use for secondary compromise. And, so this is a real problem, and it's a ubiquitous problem. It exists across the world. You are not alone. Every single enterprise that owns a website, or any company that owns a website, whether you be small, medium, or very large, has the same issue. You've got uncontrolled code that's running in every consumer session that, when compromised, can do some bad stuff, steal stuff, and lead to big impact to both the consumer and to your brand as a whole. This is not a threat that has been ignored. In fact, it's one that's been written about and talked about and looked at and warned about for years. We started our work in the space about a decade ago. There was a ton of and a flurry of activity around really high profile breaches from, say, like 2017-ish to around maybe 2021, 2022. It was capturing news cycles. People were talking about it, but then the pandemic happened, and in that time frame, the collapsing of the perimeter and the rise and scourge of ransomware kind of sucked the conversation out of the room. But thankfully, the focus had already been established within the card brands. Visa started writing about it in 2022, saying, these e-commerce platforms are being targeted. It's the third-party code integrations, that those services that are being used as the attack vector for the adversary. They're using this supply chain, targeting these third-party providers, compromising them, and then stealing card data and other valuable PII. They were warning about that in 2022. In 2022, the SSC, the PCI Council, released version 4.0 of the DSS, which provided for future data requirements to prevent eSkimming. They gave it was about 2.5 years from the time of release before an actual enforcement deadline was kicked in April of last year. That deadline is coming past. And, so you are not compliant with PCI if you do not have the controls that they outline in place. And so, you're not alone in the sense that maybe you're behind the curve and, maybe you didn't get, to the point of full compliance before that deadline hit. But you need to get moving. You need to get moving because of the fact that, the threat landscape is heating up. The types of activities from the adversary are heating up. And the card brands and their enforcement is heating up. And, that trickles down into, much more scrutiny, of maybe a self-assessment questionnaire that you might be filling out, or definitely inside, an AOC or a ROC that's conducted by a QSA. And we're going to talk about those things as we go along in the session, all of them. What's going on in the threat landscape? What are the card brands saying? What's the visibility in terms of adoption? What are the QSAs saying? What are they going to expect from you? And hopefully at the end of this discussion, you'll leave with an understanding of what the best practice that you need to undertake is and how you get moving, with enough of a prompt and wind at your back to go make the case internal if you're, encountering any friction there, and to just getting this problem solved. Because one thing I will tell you is that unlike many, many things that we have dealt with in both security and compliance, for myself, it's been 17 years in cybersecurity, 30 years in IT, and as a whole, this is an easy problem to solve because of, tech like what Source Defense has deployed, and, our ability to get out there and kind of make this problem go away in an inherent sort of preventative first behavior-based kind of approach. And it doesn't require a lot of action on your part to make it happen. So this is low-hanging fruit against a fairly pronounced risk with a really, really amazing cost-benefit trade-off. And what comes on the back of that is compliance adherence to PCI, meaning you won't suffer any of the fines and judgment that are soon to be levied for people who have passed this cycle, passed that deadline, and are now getting into the 1 year on, why haven't you done anything kind of mode. For those that don't know, there are requirements that have been developed around eSkimming. They are 643 and 1161. Those are the numbers that you can, look at, Google, pull down from the PCI Council website, the new version of the DSS. This is what, we're framing, the eSkimming security conversation around, is specifically those requirements. In 643, effectively what you're told is that you need to get a handle on even knowing what's happening inside your web environment. And that might seem fairly pedestrian, but for a lot of people, a lot of enterprise customers, this really is the first time they're taking this thoughtful of an approach to looking at what are the scripts running on our site? Do we even have an inventory? Do we even know who these partners are? Are they supposed to be there? Can we confirm that they're authorized to be there? Is the integrity compromised? Do we have a way to assure that integrity is in place? How do we know if a compromise has happened? We got to monitor for that. We got to look for changes, indications of, an attack underway. And what do we do when we find, that a script has become, poisoned, if you will, and that we have malicious activity running, in our environment? Those are all the things that are requested and required of you under 643 and 1161. Now, the way that the compliance standard is written, we think there's some gaps in there. We think there's some things you need to know about, the approach that adversaries are taking. We think there are things you need to understand in terms of, do's and don'ts, to get this done right, so you don't have to do it multiple times, and so it doesn't become, a thorn in your side. And I'm going to impart some of those, thoughts on you, as we go through the session here. Okay. But effectively, as you can see, my cute little picture of the hourglass, the time is running out, is run out, will soon run out. We did hear from somebody as early as yesterday, a call I was on with a QSA who's done a lot of assessments about the state of affairs. And I think that it's important, that and understand, where things are from an adoption perspective. It's the view of the world, the view of the community, that the future dating of these requirements, really has left consumers and brands exposed. If you look at the difference between the DSS as it was written in the 3 version versus now, I think there's something like 100 additional pages that were added. There were like 52 new controls that were required under DSS 4.0. And so that's a lot. And future dating the requirements was meant to give you guys a chance, to get programs in place to start to tackle these issues, et cetera. Some of you, and according to this, QSA, many clients were playing in the early rock game. Maybe your rock was accelerated, or your SAQ, you accelerated it before the April 1st deadline of last year, sort of buy yourself another year. You extended it out before you had the controls in place. It'll come up to the 2026 cycle before we need to, prove that we have this in place. You've still been non-compliant, by the way. The deadline was the April 1st, 2025. Just because you didn't get it or you got underneath the rock radar, if you will, doesn't mean that you haven't been non-compliant. Other people, according to this conversation, and I believe it, like looked at all the additions of 4.0, try to tackle as many as possible, knowing they would have some gaps, trying to make the investments into the heavy stuff. But the risk is real, the threats are serious, and this is a dangerous game. And I will talk about what we're seeing in the threat landscape to try and help make that case for you, okay? But we've also been working with MasterCard and some of the other brands, to give them a general sense for what type of, security posture the world is in. And now this is not all enterprise websites, right? So I would say, some of the level ones, the big box, the big brands that the analysis would look a little different, probably a better adoption scale or whatever. But we took 10,000 sort of in that level two, level three sites, and we analyzed them for one of the brands. And what we found was like 94% still have no security in place related to eSkimming. And of those that did have security in place, many were relying on CSP and SRI. Of those where CSP was in place, it was in report only, so not monitoring, violations being logged but not blocked. Only a small percentage like actually took, and have controls in place that would be effective against the threat. That's got to stop. I mean, I sit here as both, a consumer and a vendor, right? And I say, I don't want to I've had so many, my identity has been stolen, we're got you covered, letters that have come in the mail, that I just am so desensitized to it at this point in time. Like, it's just more fraud, more identity theft, every single day. I'm probably the outlier because I just kind of like, look at it and go, well, it's the natural course of doing business and it's just going to happen. But most people, at least they tell, on a survey side of things, are going to walk away from a brand if you get them popped. And so there's risk there of losing that consumer sentiment. There's risk of fines and judgment. And then there's the ultimate risk, for downstream fraud and the cost of, fraudulent transactions, that you have to undertake. And so it's sort of a dangerous game. This is not me meant to, sort of like, cast judgment so much as to say, this is a clarion call from my desk. This is a real problem. We're seeing it every day. We've got a research arm that is plugged in and seeing threats. We're actually actively working to understand and identify compromised sites, feeding that knowledge back in, and working on PFIs, the forensic investigations and things of that nature. And from our perch, this is just like a time bomb waiting to go off. And so don't let it go off in your face, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, you know, Getting into a little bit of the research side of things, make the whole conversation about this, but like just looking at some of what we saw in 2025, and we just did last week an update around our, Q1 research. These attacks are proliferating. They're gaining in sophistication. They're not getting smaller in number. They're getting, more vast, wider, deeper, more aggressive. The capabilities are improving. The attacks themselves are evolving already to evade the controls that have been outlined and telegraphed, in the written DSS, which obviously an attacker can get a hold of. In a lot of cases, checking the box on compliance is creating a false sense of security, and it's making merchants feel like they've got the problem under control, but the way they've approached it leaves them wide open for the types of attacks that we're finding in the wild. Interestingly, these attacks are also starting to diversify in terms of the types of data that they're after. They're not just isolated to card theft. They're stealing other forms of data as well. And compromises are slow and low, and they persist for inordinate amounts of time, and recompromise or reinfection is super high. Of the cases that we've seen, something like an 18% reinfection rate. And out of that, like 57% of those that were reinfected were hit with a different type of compromise. So not just the same code reappearing, but adversaries going back with another attack pathway. In Q1, we saw, an interesting shift to or a resurgence in the attack against not just your digital supply chain, but against first-party scripts, which means there's finding chinks in the armor against what you have from a server-side control perspective. Silent skimming is becoming an incredibly prevalent technique where there's no detection and it's scraping in line. There's no, I'm sorry, not no detection, but there's no obvious signs of an attack, no double entry, no requirement for repeat on the consumer side. We're seeing a ton of pixel perfect payment page spoofing. Say that three times fast. But yeah, where it's just undiscernible, as to whether or not you are literally, interfacing with like a Stripe payment page or is it the adversary? Thousands of sites found under attack in Q1. And in fact, we've started, it's April 23rd. We are involved in 10 major enterprise investigations involving eSkimming right now through the work that we do with our forensics partners. And so big names are getting hit and mom and pops are falling victim. This is everybody's problem, and the adversary likes it to be everybody's problem. They'll go after the small site and hit that in a one to many. And they'll just use a highly utilized third party and compromise that and hit them that way. And they're also going after custom crafted attacks that really spend a lot of time and take on APT style type of approaches just to try and get into the big brands. CSP bypass is a major theme, getting around the controls that many people may be utilizing, along with, and this was one that I found really alarming, CSP weaponization, where we actually see CSP used as a persistence pathway. And payment page security alone isn't adequately defeating the threat. And I think that's really important because the DSS, and you might hear it framed out, all these requirements specifically look at the payment page. We got to get the payment page script inventory done. We got to get payment page integrity monitoring going on. We have to have payment page, response should we find compromise. But attacks are happening site wide and are not by any stretch of the imagination reserved for the payment page. In fact, they just don't behave that way. So I'll peel back the layer a couple more on this side of the conversation. Then jump over into some advice for you in terms of ways to really frame out your scope, which may be different than what you read in the DSS, and then we'll get into some of the stuff that we're hearing from QSAs in terms of what they want you to be doing to demonstrate you are compliant. But to go a little deeper, in 2025, we saw tens of thousands of e-commerce sites attacked. These were one to many, also targeted. I mentioned that. Kind of indiscriminate across the board: fashion and apparel, travel and leisure, transportation, media, government services. Interestingly, we had done some research with Verizon for the 2024 payment security report, and what we found was the more customizable the type of site, the higher instance of use of third-party scripting. And the more sort of partners that were in place, if you will, the broader the supply chain. And that may have a corollary effect to some of what we're seeing, like fashion and apparel, highly customizable, travel and leisure, highly customizable. But causality or correlation doesn't necessarily mean causality. It could just be that that's also where the numerical side of the attack surface is, in the sense that there are a lot of those types of sites that are out there. But everybody's a target. We saw 92 distinct campaigns. We saw 30 compromises using Google Tag Manager. And we saw a massive 52 script modular attack infrastructure launched right at the end of 2025. And that may be why we're seeing some of the pickup that we're seeing in the Q1 in terms of the number of attacks and some of the sophistication, because it looks like there's been the development of like sort of a software as a service platform, excuse me, for eSkimming attacks. In 2025, We saw 1,000 sites attacked in a single campaign. We saw 15 languages targeted, 10 payment platforms targeted, all sorts of services weaponized. In 2026, we've seen in just one campaign alone already 2,000 sites included in that. And so that gets to maybe some of that volume increase that we could be seeing from the modularity of what we saw. Global targeting, top bank, top global supermarket chain, thousands of small merchants. I mentioned the infection rate, 18% reinfection rate, APT style attack remediation. We're seeing this persistence attempt and this increase in, again, that weaponizing of the first and third party scripts, which means, again, you should probably, in combination with what you're doing on the eSkimming client side, right, be looking at whether or not your server side controls need a refresh and whether or not you need to do anything on that aspect of web security to ensure that you're protecting the keys to that kingdom. Also, you should be looking at this problem as a defense in depth kind of solution. By putting the e-skimming controls in place, you get better visibility into what's actually happening in runtime, with like attacks, and you might be able to better detect gaps or attacks where they got through the server side controls by having the e-skimming controls in place. So there's added value there for defense in depth. We've already seen 25 unique campaigns. In 2025 we only saw 92. So we're on trend to outpace what's going on in 2026. So you got to get moving. You got to get something done, and you got to make sure you're doing the right thing. This one was the one that really alarmed me. We saw CSP weaponization, and we're working on a whole case study around this, where CSP was utilized as a control, content security policy utilized as a control, because it is referenced under the standard. But in the particular case of this attack, the adversary has continually enabled reinfection by having access to the CSP and by whitelisting services that are actually malicious. So it's like whack-a-mole, they're using the CSP to basically enable, access into and reestablish foothold on compromised sites. And so the call is actually coming from inside the house, kind of a reference to an old horror movie that I really loved. But, those are the types of things that we're seeing on the attack surface side of things. It should be, something that you're very concerned with. You are in the crosshairs. The attacks are increasing. The capabilities are increasing. They're, gaining in sophistication. And so here's sort of the middle part of the conversation where I would stress, making sure you approach the problem holistically and not just reading what's in the DSS, right? Because from our perspective and what we know and what we're seeing, a lot of what's written in the DSS in its current form, is giving the illusion of security. If you only do that and you only, use it as the barometer for what you do, you're still going to have major gaps. And it's because there seems to be a misunderstanding of the threat. We think that, a lot of guidance from experts in the space was kind of ignored. We think that it relies on an old world, very myopic understanding of what the adversaries are doing and does not evolve and change. And you will not see the DSS, be updated for multiple years now. If there's some misguidance going on, the controls that are emphasized, or at least those that are referenced in the DSS, leave you open to attack. Focus is probably way too isolated in our view. The payment page alone is not what you should be looking at. And so it kind of like misses the point. And it's got too narrow of a scope. It actually de-scoped some critical targets in the community. And it gave, a kind of a compliance shell game. And, at the end of the day, it doesn't really deliver security against this problem in its current form. Okay. And so I'll talk, about those things, and then we'll get into the QSA guidance, right? So on the controls front, if you look at the DSS, you're going to find references to content security policy and SRI as reference examples for how you can address the requirements under 643 and 11.6.1. They should not be in there. They should be removed. They're outdated controls. They should not be in the DSS. If you build a program around content security policy and SRI, and that's all you do, you are not going to stop this threat. Okay. These are static controls. They can't track the evolution. We've had 80 people across, whether it be the payment service community or, those in the vendor space like myself, QSAs, et cetera, saying, get it out of there. It's still in there. CSP requires basically a whitelist That whitelist has to be continually updated to just, make sure that you've got, everything, all services detailed. It creates a breakage, creates management nightmares, whatever. But fundamentally, the real issue is it does not track what's actually happening with the script. So if your partner is the one that gets compromised and you've whitelisted their script and said, "Yep, it can run," it's going to run whether it's compromised or not. Okay, and so how is that a control? It is the trusted service that's being attacked. It is your partner network that is opening up these threats, and we're effectively saying, in the guidance of the DSS, well, just basically whitelist the partners you want to work with. You might as well not do anything at that point in time. SRI's got an issue in the sense that it requires a hash. It's a hashing system, it's a signature-based system. You don't get to have hashes in the way dynamic scripting works today. The script changes, based on time of day, customer interaction, geography, etc. You can't hash it all. In fact, one of our clients has seen tens of thousands of script changes trying to run an SRI program. It's not possible. The core author of the DSS says, didn't understand eSkimming when he wrote it, shouldn't be in there. They should change it, but he doesn't work for the council anymore. And so it's in there. Their inclusion is going to mislead you. Please, whatever you do, I don't care if you buy a single thing from Source Defense, don't build a program around CSP and SRI and think that you have stopped the eSkimming threat. It is not stopping this problem. And as I mentioned, just 2 minutes ago, right, CSP is actually now being used to compromise sites to establish reinfection. So we've got a white paper. I think Scott probably already threw it in the chat. eSkimming, behavioral based versus CSP and SRI, which is more effective. Please read that. Please, please, please read that. The core threat research tells us it is the allowed paths, the whitelist, the trusted services that are compromised time and time again. They attack your partnerships, so you cannot just rely on whitelisting. One thing that is really interesting, this sort of growth in using Google Tag Manager as an attack pathway, something you really need to understand because everybody uses Google Tag Manager. It's a great way to inject legitimate code into your site. It's also a great way for a single point of injection of malicious code across the site. It allows for rapid deployment. You trust it, so it's bypassing other security features, and there's an ability to create some complex chains that create layered attack opportunities for the adversary. You should read our 2025 threat research report for more on that. You can also just email me, text me, call or whatever. No text, email, and I can get you connected with some experts who can talk to you about what we're seeing. But you need to understand that. And again, I bring that up to emphasize, the whitelist side of things doesn't stop the problem. The other side is scope. Okay, when you look at scope and you say just payment page, you really should be looking at this problem site wide. And if you're going to invest in controls and the time and the money spent to do this, do it right. The entire website is the attack surface because if you remember back a few slides, right, when I was talking about the things that adversaries can do if they compromise script, right, they can add links, they can add forms, they can redirect users to links that are under their control or domains that are under their control. That's happening in 99% of the types of attacks that we see out there, not payment page iframe compromise or isolation down to only when somebody clicks on the checkout. And you're running all these scripts all over the site, analytics, tag managers, personalization tools. In fact, when we did research with Verizon, it was like, I don't know what the number was, but like most of the majority of the scripts are running upstream. There's still a lot of scripts running on the payment pages. But it's the non-payment infrastructure that is, under attack, and simply embedding an iframe and saying, well, I've got that there. My PSP said, if I use that, I should be good. That'll only protect from actually compromising the transaction inside the iframe. It doesn't stop the upstream compromise. It doesn't stop a redirect when somebody clicks on checkout, to an area that's under control. And so there's a white paper from Coalfire. Have a read on that one. Scott's probably put that in the chat as well. Also, what we're hearing from people that do a ton of forensic work is, they just have never seen or don't see, hosted payment pages as the, reason for compromise. This is from Security Metrics. They put this out March of last year. 2,000 forensic investigations that they were involved in 100% of the cases where eSkimming was occurred. The failure was not present on the referring page. It was because of a malicious script on the parent page or else site wide. Okay. And so you got to know that the difference between, approaching this problem for an isolated, like, in scope payment page environment versus your entire website is really nominal from a cost perspective, definitely is from a technological perspective. And so it should just be where your default focus is. You want to eliminate the threat. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do. And so, go to where the threat is and what the adversaries are all also doing. All right, I'm gonna speed up because I'm gonna run out of time if I don't, and I need to take a drink of water anyway. I've got other thoughts, in terms of what's going on. You'll find I have a lot of thoughts to share. So if you ever want to engage in a conversation, let me know. Okay, so now let's get into the sort of the QSA end of things and what you're going to end up, being asked for and things you need to be thinking about. A lot of organizations have been walking into this audit cycle thinking that they're compliant. They're then really disappointed when they find that, there's a lot more probing questions that are happening from the QSA related to client side controls, and that they really didn't have it buttoned up. You may, and I hear this from, our guys that do outreach and such. Well, I called and they said they got PCI under control. Yes, PCI has been around. We're approaching our 20th anniversary, right? But these controls for eSkimming are new. Well, I mean, they're, newish, right? Like they were put in place in 2022, but the requirement, the mandate didn't kick in until last year. But they're different. They, introduce entirely new requirements. It creates, a much different compliance management workflow than you may be used to. And so you've got to have processes built around, or at least a solution that can help you, get the answers that you need for the audit, right? And so you've got to make sure, that you're not just like falling victim to we're good or we were last year, because this year is going to be way different. I mentioned CSP as an issue in terms of like my vision and, our worldview into what's happening, but also know that even if you were to build around CSP, just having it in place doesn't satisfy the requirement. You've got to have verification. You've got to have authorization. You've got to have a mechanism for detection. You have to have like processes built around this that are demonstrable. Not, yes, we're doing it, but here's proof that I'm doing it. The underneath the hood of the audit, right, that comes into play. Um, Got to be, focused on, building out around what you're going to be asked for. Okay. So, inventory integrity, control, these are non-negotiable things now in this world, right? You're going to have a record of authorization. Okay. And it's got to be maintained and documented. And it has to be maintained and documented as things go along. You're going to have people adding things, removing things, it could be 10 things added to your website tomorrow that you didn't know that your marketing team did. You got to have a process in place. You got to make sure that there's a business justification. You've got to have, show me your log, basically. Show me your records. Show me your proof, that you're going through, and you got a process around this. How do you demonstrate that scripts haven't been tampered with? You got to have a mechanism in place that can detect changes, that can see that in real time, not just when it's deployed, right? And that include changes that are made, throughout, sort of like the time that you're managing that 1 year. Do you have a solution in place that can do that? What is it? Show me how it detects. Prove it to me, right? The proof side of things, and let me see it side of things to get involved with an audit, right? You have to have, a method for confirming that it's necessary. They're going to ask you whether your process has, repeatable, flow to it. Is it systemic? Does it really like, have you built your business processes around it? And, okay, you've got a list of the scripts, but, show me that you can prevent unauthorized scripts from executing, or that you have a response capability in place, right? They're going to ask these questions. The detection gap is there and it's closed if you do this right, but they're going to want to make sure that you have the ability to prove like a continuous monitoring program around it. They're going to ask for monitors of your solution, alert logs, processes and procedures. They're going to ask you what happens when a change is identified. How is that change triaged? What do you do with the changes unauthorized? What does it kick up? What is the response time? What are the requirements? Who's involved? All of these things, right? That you're probably used to being asked questions around for other parts, of your DSS compliance program. You're going to be asked for around this. Um, you know, you can't do periodic reviews based on what's written in 643 and 11.6.1. There's got to be a posture of, constantly scanning, right? The standard says at least every 7 days, if not more, based on your targeted risk analysis. Point in time assessments aren't going to solve the problem, and they're not going to be used to demonstrate compliance. And so you're going to fail on that front. And so, we say, okay, well, how should you be going about it? Obviously, we're a little bit biased in our approach, but we have a set it and forget it solution that's there. It's behavior based. It enforces, prevention out of the gates, and it automates all of the things that you need to do from a compliance management perspective. So what would I recommend? I'd say talk to us. There's others in the market you could talk to as well, but don't go down the pathway of trying to build all of this yourself. It's the same reason that you don't build a chatbot. It's the same reason that you don't build an analytics tool for your website. It's the same reason, that any of the third parties in the supply chain that you have in place to power your website. You should just turn to somebody to protect it. And, there's enough of us out there with expertise in the space that if you look at us, we'd love it if you looked at us. You look at somebody else, so be it. Just solve the problem, make the attack go away, get it done. Talk to us first, see if you like us. If you don't, go somewhere else. But get this thing done and get it done now, and get like an audit ready model in place where you've got full visibility, active enforcement, audit ready reporting. If you do automated client side controls, you're going to get there faster. You're going to have fewer findings. You're going to have a stronger relationship with your acquiring bank and the card brands. You're going to have like one less thing to worry about. And so, that kind of gets to the end of what I was, wanting to get done for you today. Hopefully kind of give you a little bit, of an understanding. There's a whole blog that we wrote, I think last week, around more QSA questions that are going to be answered. I think there are QSAs involved in this call today too. And we have a number of partners and relationships on that front. So happy to help, connect you with somebody who can give you more from the, audit room floor perspective if you need it. What I would suggest if you haven't done so is sort of these three steps, get a readiness assessment done. You can actually connect with somebody on our team. We will do a complimentary outside looking in review of what your current posture is, what your site looks like, the scripts that are on there. Will help you understand like a short path, to get on the right way. Evaluate your controls. If you've got some in place, see whether or not they're going to, be enough to answer some of those things I talked about in terms of process and documentation and all that. Chances are, if you built it yourself, it's not. So get moving, go engage a purpose-built solution. We have like what we call a 30-day action program. Ultimately, like we can solve the problem for you in 22 hours. Our solution deploys as a couple lines of code, super lightweight, easy to test, trusted, and it's something that you can take care of without thinking about it. And but get engaged, get moving, get on a pathway, get this thing done. And yeah, so we'll stop talking now, at least from my perch, and we'll see if we've got any questions that might need to be answered. I will stick around for a while, and if I do not get any questions, then we can go back from and give you back to your day. Um, well, let me see what I got. And if you've got something that's coming to mind, please ask. Um, hang on one second. Okay, what were you checking when you say pull websites for CSP? The iframe displaying the card capture form requires it for level one. The integrating page embedding that iframe is SAC A or SAC AP, of course, required to accept some PSP is asking for it. I didn't see. Huh. I'm not sure, Marco, that I got your question completely understood, and I apologize for that. Um, I can definitely get you a rundown on it if we could, maybe take it offline. I'm not sure I understand the nature of it because you're going between controls and also reporting, reporting requirements, SAC AP. I need a little bit more clarity on that one to give you best answer. So I apologize, buddy. If you'd like, though, we can definitely take it offline and we can get in there. Why should you, for your iframe, allow any outside scripts? Um, Okay, so I see. I think I understand what you're asking about. Why should, so the second question, why should you, for your iframe, allow any outside scripts? Aren't that two different environments, the CSP or monitoring? Okay, so I think that I think I can probably tackle that one. In most cases, at least in embedded iframe side of things, there's still script running throughout the site, and there's still script running on the referring page or on that page that's hosting that iframe. And so, if that's your question, generally what we don't see is an isolated down payment environment where the payment page itself has no scripts on it. In fact, the work that we did with the Verizon PSR found that there was scripts all over the payment pages. So if that's what you're asking, I just don't see that in practice. But also the concern that we have and that we express is that the scripts running in the referring page or in the parent page or across the site can compromise and can totally negate any control you might have on the payment page by simply offloading them to another payment page, if that makes sense, or to a compromised page. Yeah, I see your follow-on note there. I don't know. I just don't know. I don't understand the question as clear as I think I need to. All right. Let's see. Anything else out there from the audience that needs to be answered? Give you a going once, going twice on that. Looks like Scott's kept up very well with a bunch of these links. So please download some of this content for sure. I think it's useful and helpful, especially, keep an eye on what's going on in the threat landscape. Like this is a real critical path that you need to understand. You need to become more of an expert in around what the evolving threat is here for eSkimming because this isn't going away. So.